I say we're good,
Okay.
Veronica. I cannot
Yes.
hear you. Very.
Yes,
All right.
we are good.
All right, then. Thank you all. Good afternoon. This is Sonia Dellen. I would like to welcome everyone to the meeting of the State Bar Board of Trustees Audit Committee. It is April 28th at 4:32 p.m. Veronica, would you please take the roll?
Ms. Dellen,
Here.
Mr. Broughton,
Here.
Ms. Chen.
Here.
Okay. we're all
Thank
right.
you. We do have a quorum. Now, do we have, I'd like to open now for the public comment. Is there any member of the public in attendance, Veronica?
There is one, but it's Justin. You were a State Bar employee. So at the moment, there is no public
All right, then.
attendees.
Okay, then I think we can move on to our agenda. All right, then. Item 1 in our agenda is Chair's report, and at this time, I do not have a report. We will move on to item 2, which is the consent. For today, the consent is the approval of the first quarter 2021 board and travel expense report. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'll move.
Do you have a second? Thank you. Discussion? All right, then, Veronica, will you please call the roll?
Sure. Ms. Dellen,
Yes.
Mr. Broughton,
Yes.
Ms. Chen.
Yes. All right, then the consent calendar passes. Now, moving on to the third item, business. 3A is the information technology security assessment. This is an informational item only. Mr. Mazer, I believe you are introducing the item.
I am, yes, thank you, Ms. Ellen. Steve Mazer here, Chief Administrative Officer. I'm going to tee this up briefly before turning it over to Rick Rankin, the bar's interim IT director. We're going to present to you today the results of the independent IT application security assessment that was just completed. Again, this is an informational item. There's no specific action that the committee is being asked to take. We do these assessments every few years. In 2018, we did the last independent network security assessment. Later this year, we will again be performing a network security assessment, and this time we are planning to do that in partnership with the California Department of Technology, which has cybersecurity expertise and resources that are available to California public agencies. Today, we'll be discussing the application security assessment, which is the same security concept, but has a different scope from the network assessment. And Rick's presentation will explain the difference between the two. As you know, reviewing the results of the IT security assessments is part of the Audit Committee's work plan. The application security assessment was originally scheduled to be conducted last year, but our pandemic response necessitated shifting around some IT resources, so it was deferred just a bit. Finally, by way of introduction, I do just want to point out that the assessment addressed a lot of detailed, specific technical matters related to our internal and our public-facing applications. We obviously cannot discuss those specifics in a public meeting, as doing so would make us vulnerable to hacking or disclosure of sensitive and confidential information. So today we're presenting a high-level summary of the assessment results and, importantly, the plan for remediation where that is necessary. So unless there are any other specific questions at this point, I'm happy to turn it over to Rick to present the results.
Great. Thank you much, Steve. Let me get share going here. Can everybody see the slide deck?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for giving us the opportunity to present this important work. As Steve mentioned, we're going to take you through the background of this assessment and review the high-level findings and our remediation plans going forward. I'm going to go fairly quickly because we have 15 minutes, but please stop me at any time with questions or ask me to slow down. And we will have time, I hope, at the end for questions as well. Our agenda is fairly straightforward, just the purpose. We're going to inform you a bit about the team that did the assessment and the methodology they followed, and then, of course, the results and the remediation plan. Now, Application security assessment is a important piece of the security posture that we take at the bar. Network security is really looking at the perimeter around all of our technology applications and ensuring that there are no holes and no security vulnerabilities there. This assessment looks inside that perimeter and really focuses on the applications themselves, the business applications that we operate in support of the bar's mission. And it's basically cut across everything. So our applications that run in our data centers, applications in the cloud, things that work on mobile phones, et cetera. So we really cut across the entire suite of business applications. The most recent assessment was network in 2018, as Steve mentioned. We really initiated this assessment to look at three important questions. How good is our application security at this moment? What are our areas of strengths and weaknesses? And then really, what's our maturity level for our security posture, and how do we maintain that going forward in terms of policies and procedures and processes? The assessment team was a company called Aurora IT. They're a cybersecurity expert firm. They've done many of these assessments. The bar went through a competitive bid process, and we picked Aurora. Though the Aurora team was given access to all of the state bar applications so they could do their analysis and develop their assessment, the IT team on the state bar side supported them, but we did not have any involvement in the assessment or creating their deliverables. That was 100% done by Aurora. We started in early January, we finished mid-April, and we're here 2 weeks later to give you the results. So we're super excited to share with you. The scope of the assessment, we looked at a cross-section of our applications. We do have a fairly wide footprint of business applications, and so the State Bar team prioritized the applications for Aurora to look at. We looked at the high-use, high-impact applications across these 4 categories. So external, public-facing, internal State Bar applications, and things we host on our data center and things we host on cloud providers. So we looked at a pretty wide cross-section of the application footprint. The methodology that was used is one that Aurora has developed. It's basically fairly standard in the information security industry. They looked at all of the regulatory requirements and standards that we have to adhere to. They followed a bunch of different standards across. You can see the logos there. NIST is a big one, PTES as well, but they basically followed a very rigorous methodology when they conducted this assessment. There were 2 prongs to the assessment that I want to make you aware of. So on the risk side, they reviewed all of our policies, procedures, the key functionality, the way we build applications, the way we control documents. So that's a risk assessment. And they also did a very deep technical assessment, looking for vulnerabilities, penetration abilities. They looked at the actual code that our team has developed for the in-house applications. They did penetration testing on our servers and our databases. Again, it was a very comprehensive review across these 2 dimensions. They identified a number of issues, as we expected they would. These things are designed to provide us insight into our vulnerabilities. And they also provided a rubric here to assign a priority and a weight to each issue that was found. It's really the intersection of these 2 variables. What's the likelihood of this vulnerability being tested, and what's the impact of the state bar if it were tested? And so you can see there's a 4-scale rubric here from low to critical. And on the next slide here, I want to show you the way we landed from a pie chart perspective here. You can see 3% of our issues landed in the critical bucket, 7% were high, and the remaining roughly 90% were in the low and medium category. Our remediation plan is really got 5 key points that we wanted to share with you today. So it's an all of IT effort. Basically, we believe that the entire IT team of about 50 should have involvement in this to make sure that we get these things resolved as quickly as possible. The critical and high issues we're prioritizing to the top, as you'd expect, and we believe and we're targeting to have those done in the first 90 days. We are still assessing a few of them, and there are a couple that are fairly complex, but we still have a very strong target of getting them addressed in the next 90 days. I can also tell you that a couple of the criticals have been addressed already, so we've already started to take some action here. The lows and mediums, we plan on addressing as we look at applications, as we fix defects, as we make enhancements. We'll go ahead and incorporate the security, application security changes at that time. And we feel that will most likely happen by the end of the year. Just given the pace of change that we're making, the incidents and the defects that we typically look at, we're going to address the vast majority of those this year. The Aurora team that did the assessment is on deck to come back and look at the criticals and highs in the first 90 days. If some of those linger beyond 90 days, we'll have them come back as well, but they're contractually bound to come back and look at the first 90 days with us. Aurora made a number of recommendations for our security policies, and we'll be updating those as necessary over the next 2 months. Our development standards, so the standards by which we build applications for the state bar, we'll be updating those during the course of the next month, with the idea of making sure we bake in these security recommendations as quickly as we can in any future development effort or any future remediation of defects. And also, of course, for future application development, as we build new things for the bar, as we create new servers, new databases, we will include these security findings as well going forward. And then one last point here, the security findings that they returned to us were fairly well concentrated in the applications that we've built for the state bar, so custom developed applications. And so we just have a renewed commitment going forward that we're going to favor highly secured SaaS applications in the cloud from vendors like Salesforce and Oracle and Microsoft over building things in-house, because we know that that provides us a stronger security posture going forward. So those are the 5 steps we plan on taking, with the first one obviously being the most important, to get these things remediated. And with that, that's the end of the prepared slides. Happy to go back to a specific slide with question or answer questions you may have.
Thank you, Rick. Do we have any questions from the committee? All right, I do have a question for you, Rick. How has the COVID-19, work from home and, the transition affecting our IT? And yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. The team, so I've been with the bar as interim director since January. I can tell you the team that I've observed in the 3 months that I've been here is doing a fantastic job at working remote and still being highly collaborative and highly supportive of each other. All of the processes that were in place before COVID are there for development standards, code reviews, reviews of things before they go into production. So I believe that there's been very little impact in the productivity and the quality of the delivery that the IT team is providing.
As well as the security and safety of that,
That's right. The team, I think, is operating very effectively in that regard, and they are eager to adopt these new recommendations and standards into our future work.
Wonderful. Thank you and welcome aboard. Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Just a few. Going back to that pie chart.
Yes.
It kind of showed the relative problems between low and medium and high.
Yes, sir. There we go.
There we go. Yeah, I was relatively surprised by the number of medium and high percentage of problems, in this chart. And I'm kind of wondering what that's attributed to. Most of these, or a lot of our programming that we have is fairly new. So I'm wondering, kind of in a very short way, what is that? What's the cause of that? What types of things are, medium and high? And what's the cost going to be to resolve these issues?
Let me work backwards with your question. The costs we're still working out. Most of the lows and mediums, we believe we can work into the routine business of the Office of Information Technology. So we don't see a high cost there. For the criticals and highs, we're going to accelerate those into our work plan right away, and we may see some costs as a result of those. In terms of the percentages, I have to say, from my perspective, and having looked at these in other IT shops that I've been involved in, that a 10% ratio of criticals and highs versus the other 90% is well within what I would expect. The fact that the mediums, again, according to this rubric, are a little bit higher than the lows, I don't really have an answer for. We do have some deferred maintenance items that we are going to take care of that caused and triggered some of these application security recommendations, which I believe might have led to a few more mediums than lows, if you will. But the overall ratio, I think, is in line with what we would expect.
I would add just one clarifying point in terms of the newness of our systems. There are some sort of big high-profile systems that are new, but the bar does have a very large inventory of older stuff that doesn't have quite the same profile. There's many things running sort of behind the scenes that don't interact with the public or the board, but they're still there, and so it is our entire inventory does consist of things of varying ages. So not all of it is shiny and new.
And Steve, will those go away? Will they be superseded by our new technology, or are they going to be still in the back, as being used? Are those being phased out?
Well, there are certain, as part of the, for example, the fee bill funding that we got, for our IT projects, we did get funding for certain new projects, and we've allocated other funding for things, but there were, other things on the list that we didn't get specific funding for. They're still on the list of the normal, upgrade or replacement in the course of time, but there's a lot of stuff happening in the background, so they have to be sort of prioritized both in terms of available funding and just in terms of resources that are available and sort of impact. So there are certain plans to continue. The upgrade process never ends, but it's not like we're going to sort of replace everything in the next year. That's not feasible, but we do have a plan.
I should also comment, there are a number of the systems, as Steve mentions, that are running behind the scenes. We already have plans to upgrade them and move them to a cloud provider in motion. So the mere fact of moving things to the cloud provider will actually solve the security issue. So a number of those are already in motion for us.
All right, then. Any other questions? I just have a quick one. I'm so sorry. The bar exam, does that fall under this at all, or anything that you reviewed as far as security of that? Or is that being handled by a bigger, group?
Steve,
well, the AIMS application itself was part of this assessment.
Okay.
Issues related to specifically security of the bar exam that would not necessarily be under this, because this was looking at the application itself.
All right.
But AIMS was included in the assessment, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Rick and Steve. Now we will go to the second item, which actually B was withdrawn as it is part and parcel of the next item. So we're going to move on to item number 3C, the annual financial statement audit and the report of the independent auditors. Presenting this item, we have CFO Wallace Tang, and from the audit firm, we have David Bullock. Mr. Tang, I believe you'll be starting the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Dylan and Trustee Broughton and Trustee Chen. And first and foremost, that I would like to apologize that the Audit Committee didn't have more time to review this audit report before today's meeting. The good news, and Mr. David Bullock will get to this, is we got an unmodified opinion on the FY fiscal year 2020 financial statement. And closing out the prior year and having an audit conducted and present to you within 120 days after the close of the calendar year is an incredibly tight timeline. And we have inquired of legislative staff if the deadlines could be pushed just 30 more days to give a little bit more breathing room. But due to the legislative calendar and the desire to have the audit report before the first real discussion of the state bar's fee legislations, a change to the statutory 120-day deadline is not likely. And we had hoped to be able to post the document earlier and sooner, but a change in key finance staff right at the beginning of the audit really impact the audit timeline. And so apologize for that. And I'm going to share screen and bring up the PowerPoint presentation. Can you see it okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So again, this is Wallace Tang, the Chief Financial Officers of the State Bar. And today, I'm going to briefly present the high-level financial results for the fiscal year 2020, and followed by a discussions on audit reports and required communication by Mr. David Bullitt. And he is the partner with Macias, Gini and O'Connell, which is our external CPA firm auditor. A little bit background to start with. So to recap the responsibility for the audit committee, the committee is charged to assist the Board of Trustees of the State Bar in fulfilling its oversight responsibility as related to the integrity of accounting and financial reporting processes and the system of internal controls and audit process. Current audit standards require that the independent auditors to meet with the audit committee and also to communicate the internal control related matters identified in such an audit. And that's the reason why we have invited Mr. David Bullitt to join us as well. And pursuant to 2 Business and Professional Code Section 6145A and 6222. And 6145A required that the State Bar to engage an independent auditor firm to audit our financial statement. And the 6222 requirement is relating to having a review on our legal service trust fund and for compliance. So as I mentioned that Macias, Gini and O'Connell CPA firm was contract in the 2018. So in other words, FY fiscal year 2020 is the 3rd year of audit. And I also mentioned the 120 days statutory requirements for submitting financial statement report to the legislature. So, the required due date is the April 30th. And our financial reporting period starts from January the 1st to December 31st, 2020. And in this 2020 audited financial reports package, it includes four sections. So the first part is the annual audited financial statement that include the statement of net positions and other related statements, along with the independent auditor's report. And as I mentioned that for fiscal year 2020, we get a modified opinion from Macias, Gini and O'Connell. And then followed by that report, and we have the Legal Service Trust Fund Program report for compliance review. And then the third one is the statement of expenditure of mandatory fees. And the last one is the report to this audit committee and the Board of Trustees relating to communication of internal control review as part of this audit. So I would like to bring up the high-level financial positions to brief the audit committee. The best way to look at it is the balance sheet. So basically, the balance sheet is a document, a report that's presenting the financial positions at the end of the year. And including in the balance sheets, the major items include the assets, liabilities, and also there's a net position figure as well. So if you look at the bottom row, net positions, at the end of 2020, our balance was about 92.5 million, comparing to 144.5 million in 2019. And you will see that is a pretty significant drop of about 52 million or 36%. from 2019 to 2020. And we have reasons for that. And the significant drop represents the excess of expenses over revenues across all funds. And the decrease was largely due to a few contributing factors. Number one, we had experienced decrease in grant revenue from a delay in the Judicial Council contract supposed to be signed in 2020, but that was delayed to early 2021. So with the delay of that contract signing and along with the trust account revenue getting down, decreasing from the reason of falling interest rates. Another contributing factor to the decrease was the increase in grant expenses on several programs, including especially legal service trust and bank settlement. And very special in fiscal year 2020, I want to bring this up that there was a one-time adjustments in terms of the net OPEB liability. OPEB stands for the other post-employment benefit. That is basically is our staff retiree health plan. And back in 2020, there was a change of benefit terms to extend coverage to bargaining unit staff. So with that change of benefit terms, and we recognize a one-time increase in the retiree health plan liability. And overall, this decrease in 2020 is consistent with the basis for us making projections for 2020 entering 2021. Another way to look at the financial statement is to dissect the net positions into two parts. One is the operating revenue, and the second part is operating expense. So this is the slide showing the breakdown of the operating revenue expenses, the movement from 2019 to 2020. If you look at the top row, operating revenue, and for the year 2020, we recognize and book 184 million operating revenue, comparing to 203.2 million in 2019. So that was a drop of about 9.4% in terms of 19.2 million. So you see our revenues dropping. And then take a look at the mid-page of the slide, the operating expenses, the one that bolded, the numbers showing 242 million operating expenses in 2020 versus 199.3 million in 2019. So combining these two set of data, that we have a drop of revenue, operating revenue, and we have increases in operating expenses. Then let's take a look at what happened and what factors driving all these changes. Regarding operating revenues, down by 19.2 million compared to 2019. And this decrease was largely due to a few factors. Number one, as I mentioned before, that because of the falling interest rate, the trust account revenue was down by about 20.2 million. And although also we have decreases in grant revenue for about 19.2 million and decrease in other revenue for 2.3 million, and offset by 23.6 million increase in license fees. And that was the increase in the license fees happened and approved for 2020. And then on the operating side, operating expense side, it was increasing. And the increase largely due to the net 12.7 million increase due to combined the OPEB, which is again the retiree health plan program, and the pension expenses exceeding contributions. And as I mentioned, that there was a one-time recognitions of about 23 million in the OPEB liability expenses per generally accepted accounting principles, which is accrual basis. For accrual basis accounting, that require us to book the liabilities when the event incur, even though we do not pay out in cash, to cover the retiree health benefits plan for non-executive staff effective January 1st, 2020. Another key factors contributing to the increase of operating expense was the increase in program expenses, primarily in the Client Security Fund, Chief Child Counsel, and grant funds.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Going back a couple of slides, we talk about the decrease in the IOLTA, the trust fund revenue because of the interest rates.
Yes.
Sonia, I thought that we had negotiated with a lot of these banks an increase in the percentage that they were going to pay us on these IOLTA funds. Did that happen, or is that something separate that we haven't included in here?
I am not familiar with that at the moment, Mark. I have to find out. Wallace, do you have any? I will have to find out, Mark.
Okay, so I mean, the decrease is because the interest rates are going down, as I understand it. It's
That's
not
right.
because, and you have not addressed the issue that I'm talking about, which is that we apparently negotiated with a number of these banks to increase the percentage that they pay to the state bar from those IOLTA accounts. So I don't know where that is. And the other thing that I'm looking at is the increase in the OPEB liability. That, if I'm not mistaken, that's something that we agreed to do in the last labor negotiations, sort of knowing that this was going to be a larger expense that we had to sort of incur. And then we got some concessions, if you will, from the labor union in terms of helping us get the fee increase. Is that a fair assessment of that issue?
Yes.
And it's one time, right?
Yeah, this is a one time.
And we got this nice fee increase that we haven't gotten in 20 years, and we're still showing a deficit. So,
Yeah.
Somewhat concerning.
That is true.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would just add that the fee increase helps fund the contributions on an annual basis as you're contributing to the plan. But on the GAAP requirements, it requires you to recognize the full liability now, present value of those future benefit payments. So on one hand, you're recognizing the full burden of making those benefits available in the future. On the other side, you've increased your fees to cover that, but that is going to be covered over time as you collect license fees in the future. You'll be making contributions to the plan that will help fund the plan.
All right.
Okay, then we'll move on. And next I have Mr. David Bullard and to take over on the overview of the audit result. Thank you, David.
Great, thanks, Wallace. And you're controlling the slides, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, great. So I've just prepared a short presentation, and this might look familiar. We met back in November in our planning meeting. So we're using a similar format here. So I'm repeating this slide from our planning meeting. It's just a nice reminder of our responsibility as the auditors. And so we're expressing opinion on the financial statements. And that's based on following the standards. You know, we have generally accepted auditing standards. Everyone's familiar with generally accepted accounting principles. That's for financial reporting. And that's the standards that management follows when they prepare the report. But we as auditors follow audit standards. And so those audit standards dictate, how we should perform the audit to provide, reasonable assurance. As part of that process, we evaluate internal controls. We're not doing an audit of the internal controls, and we don't express an opinion on your internal controls, but we do evaluate them as part of the process of how we go about the audit. And then if we identify any deficiencies in internal controls that rise to the level of a material weakness or a significant deficiency, we report that to you and your responsibility as the oversight body. Next slide, please. And so I think Wallace's slide earlier already mentioned there's 4 deliverables that we have today. The first one is the audited financial statements. And that's for the calendar year ended December 31, 2020. On top of that, we issued 2 other reports. Now those say examination, not audit, and there's just a nuance there. An examination is very similar to an audit. It follows the attestation standards. Those are also professional standards of the AICPA. And basically, an audit is more related to financial statements, whereas an examination is more related to a compliance opinion. So both of those examinations express an opinion of compliance, not that those are financial statements in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So it's just a little bit nuanced, but those are both examinations that we perform under the attestation standards. And then finally, the 4th report is our summary of the audit results. And so we communicate certain matters there, bring those to your attention that we're required to by our audit standards, and then other things as well. So I'm going to get to that in the next slide, or next couple slides. Here's the timing. We're just reiterating the timing that we discussed at planning. We completed our final field work for the most part in March and into April, and completed the reporting and the presentation of the financial statements in April. And here we are at the end of April, presenting these financial statements before the deadline. The next slide just summarizes what we're required to communicate. So the first 2 items, the first 2 bullets, we communicated that back in November. Those are planning matters, discussing the scope of what we're doing and the timing of the audit. The results are laid out in that 4th deliverable, the report to the board. But just to quickly summarize, we communicate qualitative aspects. There's an expectation that things are going to remain consistent from year to year unless we disclose there's been a change. Okay, and so there were no changes in accounting practices that we need to bring to your attention. We didn't incur any difficulties performing the audit. Corrected, there were some corrections, there were some audit adjustments. Management posted those adjustments, so there's nothing uncorrected as of the end of the year. Disagreements with management, there were none. Management represents at the end of the audit that they've provided us all the information, and they've provided us that letter. They've agreed to sign the letter, but they provide that as of the time we issue the financial statement. So we'll be getting that the next day. Management consultants or consultations with other independent accountants. If we become aware of that, we would let you know. That would be akin to seeking a second opinion. There were none. No consultations that we're aware of. And finally, any other audit issues or findings that we wanted to bring to your attention. And there aren't any, but we do have one internal control deficiency that we're reporting on the next slide or 2. And so, as Wallace mentioned earlier, we provided unmodified opinions on the financial statements. And so that's the highest level of assurance an auditor can provide, and it's reasonable assurance that the financial statements are fairly stated and that the State Bar is complying with both the mandatory fee requirement under the Keller decision and also with the legal services trust requirements. And so ultimately that's the goal, the objective, and that has been met. And then finally, getting into the oh, excuse me, there's one more slide. This is a slide that we would just let you know if there's been any significant changes in the way information is presented. And oftentimes that happens because new standards are required to be implemented. And obviously we're all familiar with pension and OPEB because they produce pretty significant liabilities on the financial statements. But there's other GASBs out there that are pretty significant. Because of COVID-19, GASB recognized that a lot of resources needed to be focused on the organization and dealing with the pandemic and providing services and not trying to implement new standards. So GASB gave everybody a reprieve and extended the due dates of standards so that people can get through 2020. State Bar accepted that extension and pushed off the implementation of GASB 87, which is the new lease standard. So that will need to be implemented by 2022 now. Is the new deadline for that. And that'll be pretty significant. You own properties both in San Francisco and LA. And so you have lease agreements there that'll need to be analyzed and reported on the financial statements differently than it is now. And then also on the lessee side. So for any assets that you're leasing, there could be a significant change there, because operating leases in the past, you would just expense it as you made payments. So if you were renting office space or equipment or vehicles, you would just expense those as you use the asset. Now you'll be reporting a liability for the use of that asset over the lease term. So if it's a 5-year lease, 10-year lease or longer, you have to report a liability for those future payments. So it's a different perspective. That'll need to be implemented in the next 2 years. And then 96 is also pretty significant. We just had a presentation on your IT systems and all the different applications that you have. Any subscription-based IT arrangements that are beyond a year will then need to be captured as well and reported in the financial statement. So there's 2 pretty significant standards in the future that you'll need to implement in the next couple of years. And then the final slide is just our internal control comments. So we did have one, there are no material weaknesses, but we did have one one deficiency that we consider to be a significant deficiency. It really has to do with the financial reporting process. And as Wallace mentions, it's a pretty tight timeline, and most governments have 6 months to issue financial statements. That's kind of the standard, if you will. And so this legally mandated deadline of basically 4 months is a pretty tight deadline. So so that's already creating pressure. But I think with the fact that those responsible for putting the report together are all fairly new to the organization, most of which I think started after 2020 had ended, along with just the pandemic has an impact. It's harder to collaborate when you're not all in the same office space. And so we cited those as the 2 primary reasons. And I know management also had some challenges with the new system implementation and making sure that running the reports for this year end during the close, trying to line those up with reports that may have been used in the prior year close for 2019. So there were definitely understandable reasons why things were delayed. And then I'll let Wallace address any management response to those. But all in all, I think it was a successful audit, and we were able to meet the deadline. So I think those are all good things. And with that, I'll turn it over to Wallace or any questions that you might have.
And for the Audit Committee, the following resolution is recommended to the committee, and to resolve that the Audit Committee receive, reviews, and direct staff to file the State Board's audited financial statements and related auditors' reports for the year ended December 31st, 2020, with the Board of Trustees, the State Legislature, and the Supreme Court.
Thank you, David and Wallace, for the presentation. Do we have any questions? I know that there is a recommendation right now. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I have a few. I hesitate to ask these. Accounting is completely Greek to me. I can differentiate equations and do OChem and everything else in the world. 1 + 1 is always equal 2 to me, and it never does, especially when you're talking about government sort of accounting ideas. So I hesitate to ask questions, but what does the term unmodified opinion mean in the context of what we're doing here?
Sure. So so the terminology used to be unqualified, meaning that there were no qualifications made on expressing an opinion. Under the clarity standards, so there was an effort by the AICPA to make the report more clear. And so I'm not sure if it achieved that, but an unmodified opinion basically means that we agree with the way the financial statements are presented, and we're not making any modifications to what management has reported in the financial statements. And so when we're talking about financial statements, we're talking about the 3 primary financial statements, which presents the position as of a specific date. So the end of the reporting period is December 31. So that's a date in time. It's a snapshot in time. Then the operating statement shows you what happened over the year. And then the cash flows just gives you a little more information about what happened over the year affecting cash. So those are the financial statements. And then there's the footnote disclosures. So all of that encompasses the basic financial statements. And we agree with how that information is presented. We believe it follows generally accepted accounting principles.
In other words, you're sort of certified or saying that that the bar's financial statements, if you were, are accurate.
Correct.
Is that sort of a fair assessment of it?
Right.
So I'm wondering, since we now are on a sort of fiscal year, if you will, of January 1 through December 31st, and then after December 31st is when you, the auditors, can begin to do your work. Is that sort of accurate? In
Right.
other words, you don't do this quarterly or periodically through the year, as I imagine that Wallace does his work. I mean, he doesn't just start on it on December 31st.
That's correct. Yeah, things
So-
things are processed during the year, then the books are closed. And December 31 is considered what we call it a cutoff period, and it's the date that everything stops for that fiscal year. And so then when we're talking about closing the books, there's things that are done for reporting purposes that you're not, you process receipts, you process payments, you process payroll, all these things are happening during the year. But at the end of the year, you're focused on reporting, and reporting might have to do with the capital assets and depreciation or other things that only happen at that cutoff date.
Well, would it help? We're talking about a little bit about changing or getting the legislature to extend that period. And part of it has to do with how they have to sort of report at the first quarter. Is there some way to sort of back up when our sort of fiscal year would be closed? In other words, a lot of businesses, go from July 1 to June 30 as their fiscal year. We may have done that sometime in the past, but somehow it was changed to December 31. So if instead of moving that April 30th date, could we move back possibly or up the closing date to make this an easier process?
I would probably, I'm not sure if that's for me or Wallace, but I would say that, when you change your fiscal year, it's a pretty big deal. It should be a one-time change. There should be a reason behind it. To meet a deadline, it may be a reason to do that kind of a change, but it would be a significant change because you measure everything as of these specific dates. And so you'd have to remeasure a 12-month period, shifting that time. So if there was a decision to make that, it's worth the effort to make that change to process the year-end close more easily, that might be a reason for making such a change. But I'd defer to Wallace and management for those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, and Trustee Broughton, that I agree to David that if we move that will be a big change. But I'm seeing that down the road in the future, now we have a more stabilized team within finance, and hopefully that looking forward that will be less turnover. So as long as we have a more stabilized team, getting this financial statement done and audit done within 120 days, I don't see a big problems with that. And look at this audit, and we were short-handed, and actually we have 3 new leadership staff just joined in 2021, which is after the close of 2020, and it was hard, but we still make it. So that means it is pretty manageable within the 120 days requirement. It's a matter of if we can keep up and retain and have a stabilized staffing structures, and then I don't see a problem with that.
I would also imagine that even if we move the FYE,
Yeah.
it will still be 120 days.
Yes.
It will still have to be, and the one that you need to move probably is 120 to 130, if there's such a thing. But I would imagine that still there will be a period of time where you have to complete everything.
Mm-hmm.
And well, first I'd like to, this is great. Unmodified would mean a clean audit, right? That's how you would term it, to be a clean audit. And so that is a testament to how the State Bar Finance Committee team, the finance team, have been working on our, reports and controls. In these challenging times, I can imagine and with the turnover that have been, it is almost like a miracle for everyone to get this all together. We are not, as Marcus expressed, getting a report yesterday is just not really the most ideal thing, especially when it comes to numbers. And attorneys doing a lot of things and with, looking at numbers too, and us. So I just want to thank, I think, do I have any questions? Oh, so, and Wallace, you have mentioned that, you're putting everything in place. You have a good, you have already completed almost your senior finance team, so that we are expecting that next year it will be a little bit more efficient. Although we had a pattern of, getting reports so close to our meetings, hopefully really we will have a few more, probably a week to do that. So we're looking forward to that. I don't think I have any questions on the report itself. I think I'm just pleased that the report is clean. But we have to be cognizant of how we can really make this, because we are carrying over a 2019 recommendation also, and that's all operational. Do we have any other questions?
So one question I had goes to the significant deficiency that was identified. I mean, we talked about the turnover in key finance personnel. That's clear. I understand that. The impacts of COVID-19, I understand that. What do we mean by the workflow of financial activity as being one of the root causes? And how does the state bar solve for that going forward?
Not a question for me or Wallace?
Yeah, David.
Was it me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking at our recommendation, and that's on page 5 of the report to the board, and we talk about just basic internal controls. I'm looking for the wording that you're talking about. So do you want?
No, I'm looking at slide 17 in the slide deck that is currently being shown. So it says,
Oh, okay.
you name 3 root causes: turnover,
No,
impact
that's
of the
2.
pandemic, and workflow.
Yeah, that's 2. So the impact of COVID-19 pandemic 2, the process and workflow. So,
Oh, I see.
So they're both part of the financial activity processing, okay, and the way work flows from those staff that prepare documentation to those that review and post it and reconcile. There's a process for that's the workflow we're speaking to.
I see. Okay. And then I guess one, and this goes back to Wallace's presentation. I just wonder whether in the past we had seen, you're in the numbers slides that you showed us, there's a variance, between 2020 and 2019. Could we also in future slides also see the variance to budget? So we just curious to see whether there is, whether these variances were budgeted for, or whether there was stuff that was unanticipated, and if so, why?
Yes, Trustee Chen, that is a good suggestion. That is definitely doable, and both David and I should agree with that. And yeah, so that would be a good suggestion for continuous improvement, and okay, that will make it more informative to the audit committee. Definitely, we will do that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for the suggestions.
Sure.
I have one short question on it. Can we do anything on a quarterly basis such that would help in doing the annual report? I mean, I don't know what it is that you can prepare information that would be easily, provided if we were doing something on a quarterly basis.
Well, Chair Dalen, so far on a quarterly basis, we do financial analysis on the budget versus actual comparison. And and we present each quarter's financial analysis to the committee as well. But to answer your questions, in the past, State Bar has not done quarterly financial statement based on generally accepted accounting principle. And FYI, in the public sector for publicly traded company, and they were required by Security Exchange Commission, SECs, to perform and get a quarterly financial statement done. But so far in general, in governmental entities, I rarely see that. And maybe David, you have another comment?
Yeah, I don't typically see quarterly reporting in governments, and there's a lot of effort in there with the SEC reporting. They don't do complete full-blown audits, but they do reviews, and reviews are more akin to management inquiry and analytical procedures, but not a full-blown audit. It may help, and it sounds like there's just some things that are done annually that can't be avoided, like the pension and OPEB. Those are just annual calculations. Certainly, by analyzing the financial statements on a quarterly basis and compare that to budget, you're probably able to more frequently identify any issues that might come up and try and resolve those if they need to be, if there needs to be any changes. So I think it's a really good process to do that on a quarterly basis. But financial reporting wise, I don't think there would be anything, there'd be a lot of effort added to do some kind of quarterly reporting.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? We do.
I sort
We
of
do
have a
have-
question on the proposed or recommended resolution. I want to make sure I understand what it's saying. The way I'm reading it is it would be read that the Audit Committee has received, reviewed the State Bar's audited financial statements and related auditor's report for the year ended December 2020, and directs staff to file it with the Board of Trustees, State Legislature, and Supreme Court. I mean, am I missing something? I don't know what it means when you say the Audit Committee receives and reviews and directs. We have received it, we have reviewed it, and now we're directing.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Trustee Mark. I think the wording would be that we have received and reviewed. And that-
Thereby direct or
You
authorize.
could say like the Audit Committee having received and reviewed,
Yeah,
blah, 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 direct.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Do we have, Veronica, are we able to make changes to the recommendation on the board?
Yes, I will
Thank
do
you.
that.
So Veronica, are you changing the resolution now?
Oh, I was gonna do it when before the board meeting, but I can do it now. I can project it now.
Oh, are we supposed to vote on this now? That's the reason I raised it.
Okay.
Yes, I think that we're supposed to vote this.
Yeah. So maybe let me stop sharing, and then Veronica, you can post your resolution.
Yes, I'll
That would
go
be
and
good.
get it. Hold on.
While Veronica is doing that, I really would like to thank David Bullock and the MGO team for completing the audit under these challenging times, and also our deep appreciation to the State Bar Finance and Executive team in coordinating information and documentation with our auditors. With the pandemic and the turnovers. I believe that you did a great job in combing through the report in a short period of time and presenting to the audit committee. We are very pleased also to have our finance team almost complete, or hopefully complete now, and that the plan to solidify the operational process is underway. Thank you also to the audit committee, my co-trustees, for the review. All right, do we have the recommendation now? Can you make it a little bit bigger?
Having received and reviewed, I think was a good suggestion.
Yeah, so you have to put having before received and then eliminate the comma after received. And I guess there needs to be a comma after committee. So audit committee, comma, having received and reviewed.
Lawyers and language.
Then I would cut and
Not
paste the-
numbers.
Having received and reviewed.
You need to cut and paste the state bar's audited financial statements, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
the state bar.
Up to 20.
Go
up to
ahead, all
December
the way.
2020, Veronica.
All the way to 2020, yeah.
all the way through 2020. There you go. Cut.
Having reviewed and received the,
You need the before state bars. You need a comma after 2020. And then I think we delete the and.
Correct.
And can we say file them, or do we have to repeat it again?
You can say them.
Okay,
hi, Donna.
Hello.
All
Perfect.
right. Is this good already? Well, Mark and Helen? All
Fine.
right,
I think it's good.
do I have a motion?
so moved.
Second,
All right, Veronica, can you call the roll? Oh, do a discussion. Hearing none, Veronica, please call the roll.
Okay. Ms. Dellen,
Yes.
Mr. Broughton,
yes.
Ms. Chen.
Yes,
Okay.
All right. Motion is passed. Thank you again. On that note, many thanks to the committee members and staff, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
thanks.
Hey, Donna, can I give you a jingle on something else while we go later?
You're on mute.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye.